My name is Thomas Mannion, and I am a Kevin B. Harrington Student Ambassador. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and students at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us for this morning's event. The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens of all ages to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities and to strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. Before we begin this morning's program, I would just like to remind you to all silence your cell phones and other devices that make noise. I now have the distinct honor of introducing Professor Dale Keene, who will be leading us in this morning's panel. Professor Keene is a professor here at St. Anselm College in the Politics Department. In 1989, he taught in the Political Science Department at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, and was the founding director of the Pryor Program for Leadership Studies at William Jewell College in 1993. He joined the Department of Politics at St. Anselm College in 1994, and in 2000, he became the founding director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Keene.
Thank you, Thomas. In going around the room this morning and talking to a few of you, people were asking me the question, well, we know what the Institute is, but what's this? What is this program? And since I'm filling kind of the, quote, academic role this morning, I wanted to say something about an old German thinker named Hegel. And Hegel said that we understand our lives through tension. And there is in this world, and there is in our institutions, and there is in our marriages and our families, tension. There's what we want it to be, and we strive and we work so hard to make it what we want it to be, and then there's the opposite. It's the tension. It's things to occur that we don't want to occur. And the genesis of this particular program, the Ethics and Governance program, comes out of that tension. And it's one of the reasons we're here today. People enter into business with not only good intention, but with the ability to bring to our marketplace and to our world products that are wondrous. And there was a company that was based in Ireland and had a headquarters in New Jersey, but had a prominent presence here in New Hampshire, named the Tyco Corporation, and it's certainly one that we're aware of. And there was much that Tyco did and much that Tyco strived to do that was very good. But as it's so often the case in our lives and in all of our institutions, what we hope to happen is often the other things happen than what we hope. And Tyco and the crisis and the ethical dilemmas came about out of it. And while Eliot Spitzer got a lot of notoriety in New York for the settlement that Tyco gave to the state of New York because of its improprieties, Bill Gardner, our Secretary of State, was able to get more than what Eliot Spitzer got in New York. He was able to get a great deal of money, but the question is, what do you do with that money? And what Bill Gardner and the founders of this program and other programs around New Hampshire said that the money should be used to help to educate us and to help us to think about what can we do to grow out of this. Because Hegel said that out of the good intention and out of the opposite that occurs, something new and better can occur. And so we're here this morning with that in mind, thinking about how something good and something better can occur. The title seems, it's a title, Doing Business with a Mission. But it's doing business with a mission, deeply conceived, not necessarily broadly conceived. What does it mean to do business with a mission? And we have two speakers today who can help us unpack that from many different directions in many different ways. And then we'll have a time for Q&A with our speakers on this particular subject. Each of you, when you walked in today, received a program with an introduction to our speakers, John Boatwright from Loyola University, Rebecca Hamilton from Badger here in New Hampshire. Rather than read what's written there, I I want to welcome both of them for coming to help us to think more deeply about this question of doing business with a mission, toward the end of doing things even better. To start out today, we'll have Professor Boatwright. So I welcome you here to New Hampshire and to St. Anselm College. Thank you.
Well, I just learned something new. I've taught the Tyco case. I never realized that someday I would be the beneficiary of what Dennis Kozlowski did. So that's new information. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about social enterprise and to be with an actual social entrepreneur. So I think the program should fit together very well. I will talk about the theory of social enterprise, and Rebecca, will, as an actual social entrepreneur, will talk about the practice on the ground. So the title of the talk you have here is Doing Business with a Mission, the Promise and Perils of For-Profit Enterprise. The talk was originally titled For-Profit Social Enterprise, an Economic and Legal Analysis, and that's exactly what I will do. Talk about the economics of social enterprise and then about some of the legal problems that are encountered in social enterprise. So first of all, quite simply, what is social enterprise? Which goes by many different names. It's also known most commonly perhaps as social entrepreneurship, but also social venturing, social innovation, and so on. So there are many different names. My definition is social enterprise seeks innovative means of providing critical social benefits in a market for disadvantaged people who cannot afford them or are otherwise excluded. So what are these critical social benefits? Well, this should come as no surprise. Employment, housing, health care, nutrition, education, and so on. These are things which people, really need, and in a decent society will be provided in one way or another. And there are many reasons for exclusion. Again, the most common being poverty, but also disability, addiction, incarceration, poor education, and so on. Now, these social benefits are commonly provided by three sectors. First of all, there's the social sector of largely nonprofit organizations, which you are familiar with. Secondly, there's the public sector of government welfare agencies. And you'll notice that the social sector is funded largely by donations, and the public sector by the power of government to tax. Then there's also the private sector, in that for-profit corporations often have sort of corporate social enterprise, so corporate social responsibility functions. And so to some extent, the private sector also meets these basic needs. So I want you to think of social enterprise, particularly for-profit social enterprise, as a fourth sector in addition to these three. So like a nonprofit, it has a mission to provide a social benefit for the excluded that is integral to its business mission. People there will say, this is what we are about. We are providing this critical social benefit. But yet it operates like a business by generating significant earned revenue rather than relying primarily on donations. And very often social enterprises are what we call hybrids. They're either a for-profit corporation that has nonprofit subsidiaries, think of a business with a foundation, or a nonprofit with a for-profit subsidiary. Think of a museum with a bookstore. So very often these have hybrid corporate structures. So the key question I want to pose is, why would a social enterprise incorporate as a for-profit organization? Or we could ask, if it is a for-profit corporation, how could it survive in a competitive market? Because again, it's a fourth sector in addition to the other three. And the nonprofit sphere, the government welfare agency sphere are both very well established. So a for-profit social enterprise has to compete in a very competitive environment. Or what is the competitive advantage for a for-profit social enterprise against, again, these other three sectors? And I think you should recognize these are all the same question, just asked in three different ways. Now, if you want to do good in the world, you can form an organization, and such an organization can survive in a market economy if it can do two things. One is, of course, any organization has to generate enough revenue to cover all of its costs. That's what we teach in basic economics. But the second one you might not think of is the issue of control. Control must be maintained by the group that has the commitment to the mission. And the reason is very simple. That is, if you are a social enterprise, and perhaps you're not as profitable as you could be, but yet you are quite profitable, someone could come in and take over your business and realize that full benefit. So control is one of the key critical issues with a for-profit social enterprise. So the first challenge for social enterprise is how to be competitive in a market economy against both nonprofits and government welfare services, as well as other for-profit businesses. So both nonprofits and government can be more efficient providers of critical social benefits than business when the market cannot provide them at a profit. So I want you to think of the market for social enterprises as what economists would call cases of market failure. As most of us get our housing, education, food, and so on by paying for it with the money that we have. So business does provide for our basic needs for those who can afford it. Well, but how about those who can't afford it, or where business cannot produce sufficient quantity and quality at the price that people can pay? So both nonprofits and governments address what economists call market failures. And so the key to being competitive here is to be innovative. And I'll talk more about that later, but that is the key. The possibility of the fourth sector of for-profit social enterprise really depends upon being innovative and being able to use resources more effectively than the other three sectors. Now, we can think of the market for social enterprise, again, which is a market of market failures, first of all, on the right-hand side, as unaffordable goods. So again, it's commonly recognized that if people can't afford your product, they're not going to be able to buy it. But if they really need it, then in a decent society, it will be provided in some way. Again, typically by nonprofits or by government. And then there's the area of public goods, which again is a topic for Econ 101. Things like police and fire protection, public parks, and so on, from which others cannot be excluded. So unaffordable goods, public goods are quite obvious. There's another area which I call trust goods. My favorite example is children's daycare services, which are both for-profit and non-profit. But there's a problem for parents when they purchase this good for their children. Namely, they cannot fully evaluate what they are receiving. For example, are they watering the Kool-Aid or buying cheap cookies or cutting corners here and there? As a parent, you just don't know. And so you have to be able to trust the daycare center. So here a nonprofit has an advantage over a for-profit, because since we say they are not trying to aim for a profit, we can trust them more, again, not to water the Kool-Aid and so on. So this is the market that we're talking about. So the competitive advantage of for-profit social enterprise is in addressing these market failures by innovative ways, which means, first of all, to be able to obtain greater resources and or to achieve greater impact. So business is all about taking resources as inputs and producing an output. And so there's room here for a fourth sector, for-profit social enterprise, if either A, they can obtain greater resources than one of these other sectors, and or they can use these resources with greater impact. Now, what are these resources? Well, again, Econ 101 teaches us that there are four basic types of capital. Economic capital, that is financial capital. Human capital, the skills of human beings. Social capital, and also political capital. Now let's think of these three sectors, business, nonprofit, and government, as drawing resources from the left side. Each one has a little benefit in being able to utilize, have access to these resources. For example, business has very good access to economic capital. because they can appeal to investors. They're selling goods and services in a market which they receive revenue. They have pretty good access to human capital because they can pay good wages for workers. But they're a little bit weaker on social capital. Maybe they have too much political capital, but that's another matter. Nonprofits, again, struggle with economic capital. They get most of their resources from donations. But yet they are very rich in human capital, and especially social capital. The community supports them. And of course, government has the power of taxation. So again, they have very good access to economic capital and so on. So what you can see is each of these three sectors draws upon this set of resources in different ways and utilizes those resources in different ways. So now if we have a fourth sector of social enterprise, then this fourth sector can be competitive against the other three if they can either A, draw more resources from this left side, or different combinations, or they can utilize these resources in a more effective way. Now, if you're going to develop an organization with a social benefit, the nonprofit form is ideally suited for this. So the traditional nonprofit, again, has good access to economic capital from donations. They also have good access to human, social, and political capital. And in particular, they have access to capital because of what Henry Hansman calls the non-distribution constraint. That is, typically, a for-profit corporation can distribute its excess earnings as profits. But a nonprofit is barred by the non-distribution constraint from distributing any of its resources to things other than its mission. So the important point here is that the non-distribution constraint, the legal constraint on nonprofits, creates an element of trust. We can trust them because we know our money is going to go to the mission and not to those greedy shareholders of for-profit corporations. So the distinctive feature, I think, of the for-profit forum is access to equity capital. So the question is, why would anyone who wants to organize with a mission incorporate in the for-profit forum? I say the nonprofit forum is so well suited for doing business with a mission. Go ahead and organize as a for-profit. So why would you organize as a nonprofit? Why would you organize as a for-profit? My answer is there's only one answer, namely if you have some use for equity capital. So if you're an organizer, just ask yourself, do I need or want equity capital? What could I do with equity capital? If the answer is I can do a great deal, then organize as a for-profit. But if not, organize as a nonprofit. But now one feature of equity capital is that the return, what investors get, is simply the profits of the enterprise. So we tend to think of the for-profit corporation as being organized to make a profit for the shareholders. But if you're a for-profit social enterprise, your real aim is whatever your mission is. But you still have to make a profit in order to provide a return for those who've invested their equity capital. So profits must still be generated to provide, again, a return on equity capital. So here's sort of a summation of the main points. So a social enterprise, for-profit social enterprise, is an organization whose objective is not profit, or at least not profit alone, but rather it has a mission. And now a for-profit business corporation can have any legal objective. We tend to think, again, of the for-profit corporation as creating profits for shareholders. That's true, but where does that come from? It's not basic. It's not actually required by law. It actually comes from whoever has control. So once we have a for-profit corporation with shareholders, it's the shareholders who decide what is our objective. Well, not unnaturally, typically shareholders say, give us the money, as they make the objective of the corporation a return to them. But you could have shareholders who agree that the objective of this organization is going to be to provide some critical social benefit. So from a point of view of corporate governance, the objective comes from the group which has control of the organization. Now, if the group with control is the shareholders who provide the equity capital, then they usually set the objective as what we call shareholder wealth maximization. But again, that need not be. We could have a group of shareholders who says, We want this organization to be founded with a mission. So we come to one of the principles, namely the control of a social enterprise must be held securely by a group which is committed to the mission. The classical example in corporate governance is the New York Times. The founding families of the New York Times said, we want to produce a world-class newspaper, and we may not be as profitable as we could be. But how do you do that without the possibility of a takeover? Well, quite simply, they have two classes of stock, whereas most of the voting stock is held by the family. So as long as the family holds that voting stock, they can maintain the mission of the New York Times. So in a nonprofit, control is held by trustees who represent, again, the donors and or the beneficiaries. And if we have trustee control of a nonprofit, then the mission is assured, since, again, we have the non-distribution constraint. These assets cannot be distributed. But in a for-profit corporation, control is held by not trustees, but rather by directors, who again, because of the non-distribution constraint, cannot distribute assets. So it's critically important that nonprofits are governed by trustees, for-profits are governed by directors. So here's the second challenge for for-profit social enterprise. Namely, the only reason to organize as a for-profit, as I've said before, is to have access to equity capital. Now, to have access to equity capital, you have to go to investors who are looking to invest their money for what? A return. What is that return? Well, it's the profits of the enterprise. And again, typically, investors are not willing to give up their equity capital for return in the form of profits without having some degree of control. Because how do we know as investors this organization will be organized for maximum profitability? We won't know that unless we be assured of that unless we have some degree of control. So this is the challenge. Namely, typically control is demanded by equity capital providers to ensure their return, which is in the form of profits. So by accepting equity capital, a for-profit an organization with a mission, a for-profit organization with a mission, really faces two challenges. One is this threatens the mission, which again is key to its survival, because it may have to give up some control to investors who again may want money for themselves. Secondly, it foregoes revenue from donations, again by giving up the non-distribution constraint. But typically a for-profit social enterprise cannot raise money from the public in the form of philanthropy. They have to get, again, virtually all of their revenue from the sale of goods and services. So again, they give up a great deal, namely the possibility of donations. So again, they give up the possibility of donations, and they also threaten the mission by giving up some degree of control to outside investors. Now, there's a caveat here, namely, typically for-profit social enterprises don't exist without some support from the public. So in some cases, they still receive sort of indirect donations. Again, first of all, from a public that's willing to buy goods and services at perhaps above market rates, or people who are willing to work for perhaps less than market wages. And also, in practice, they do receive a good deal of government support. So again, they're not entirely competitive with other for-profit enterprises. So here's the conundrum. That is, what are the advantages of organizing in the for-profit form where you have access to equity capital when, again, you threaten the mission and also you give up the possibility of donations? Well, here I have a couple of slides about what are the advantages of equity capital. I'm going to skim over this for the sake of time, but any MBA can tell you, what you can do with equity capital and why this is critical for any startup enterprise. So you can sort of read this quickly for yourself. So again, there's many advantages to having access to equity capital if you are an organization with a mission. But how can you acquire equity capital, again, without giving up control to investors, which threatens the mission? Well, again, there's a number of points here. I deal in class with some cases of companies who are very careful about acquiring equity capital. So the quick answer is, when you acquire equity capital, do so very, very carefully in a way that you do have sympathetic investors, in a way that you assure the control by those who are committed to the mission. Okay, so this is sort of the economic aspects of for-profit social enterprise. It's a very competitive market because you're competing against nonprofits and government. You need to be able to raise your own revenue, but you do have access to equity capital as a for-profit enterprise. So you need to be able to use that equity capital in very innovative ways, and also keep control by, again, raising equity capital in ways that do not involve giving up significant control to outside investors. So I'm going to turn now to the governance of social enterprise, which again is governed by directors rather than trustees. So there's a theory for corporate governance which justifies shareholder primacy. So there's a reason why the typical for-profit corporation is governed by the shareholders and the shareholders alone, and why they alone receive the benefits of the profits of the corporation and so on. And part of it is that only equity capital providers make firm-specific investments. But typically in a social enterprise, many stakeholders, not only investors, but members of the community, members of the organization, make firm-specific investments. And the reason why only equity capital providers make firm-specific investments is typically a for-profit corporation deals with employees, suppliers, customers, and so on in markets. And so shareholder control is adequate to protect the interests of investors. And the market transactions are adequate to protect the interests of employees, customers, suppliers, and so on. So trust is of relatively minor importance for most corporations, precisely because most of their transactions take place in markets. Well, social enterprise is very different. So again, many stakeholders make firm-specific investments. Typically, the input-output transactions don't occur in markets, but rather occur in communities. So as a result, stakeholder control is absolutely essential rather than simply shareholder control. And trust becomes a major important factor. Now, there's a lot involved in what I've just said, but the takeaway is that for a for-profit corporation, typical for-profit corporation, trust is a relatively minor factor because most of the transactions take place in markets. But in a social enterprise, we have many groups involved, and so trust is of major importance. So trust is the important factor here. So here's the third challenge for for-profit social enterprise, namely how to ensure trust, which is sufficient to assure stakeholder cooperation. Again, the cooperation not only of investors, but also of all the groups that are beneficiaries, who are employees of the organization, and so on. But again, with the nonprofit, you have the non-distribution constraint, and that's what creates trust. So you're trying to create trust like a nonprofit has, but without the non-distribution constraint. So how do you do that? So we need trust in the absence of the non-distribution constraint to ensure that assets will not be diverted to, for example, non-mission objectives, which might include perquisites for insiders, creating big offices, or gain to outsiders through misappropriation, acquisition, or liquidation. Now, corporate governance can aid in creating trust really in two ways. One is by what I call branding. So a nonprofit is already branded. It has the non-distribution constraint. We know they're going to serve their mission, and they cannot abuse the resources that we provide to them. But how about a for-profit social enterprise? So if we could have a form of incorporation that signals we are for-profit, but we're different from other for-profits. We're more like a nonprofit. You can trust us. If you buy our goods or services, be assured that the revenue will be used for the benefit of providing meeting critical social needs. And the second is altering fiduciary duties. So if you are the, for example, a director of a for-profit corporation, could you be sued by investors for not making as much profit as you could possibly make? So we need to protect the directors and managers of for-profit social enterprises from legal challenge by investors. So in order to enable the organization to pursue their social mission. Now we have examples of such. So in the United States, we now have at least 2 incorporation forms. One is the L3C, the Low Profit Limited Liability Corporation. And I believe that Vermont, your neighbor, was the first state to adopt an L3C. And then there's the Benefit Corporation. And Beaver, which we'll hear about, is organized as a benefit corporation, I understand. And I believe that New Hampshire was the second state, after Maryland, to adopt a benefit corporation statute. And in the United Kingdom, there's the community interest company. And other European countries are also developing similar incorporation forms. So if we're going to have for-profit social enterprise, in order to solve that problem of trust, we may need to have new forms of incorporation, which again provide, first of all, branding, and secondly, provide protection with regard to fiduciary duties for again, directors and officers. Now we also have what's called the Certified B Corporation. And there's a great deal of confusion here, so let me just try to clarify the difference. And again, I believe that Beaver is both legally a benefit corporation. It's incorporated under the statutes that provide for the benefit corporation. And they also have the B Corp certification, which is offered by a nonprofit corporation called the B Lab. So the benefit corporation has an incorporation statute, again, as a legal form which is created by state legislatures. So it enables companies to be committed to high levels of transparency, accountability, and purpose. So again, it imposes some demands, but it also provides some protections. So it provides officers and directors with legal protection so they can fulfill the commitment to the mission without being opening themselves up to legal challenge from investors. Whereas the Certified B Corporation, again, is conferred by the nonprofit organization called B Lab. And it's conferred on companies that meet high levels of social and environmental performance. So there's a checklist. And you have to meet a certain score to get this certification. But if you do, then you can say, you can use the symbol you see, we are a Certified B corporation. And it's also certified to high level of performance to the public. So to conclude, first of all, there is a promise to social enterprise. So for-profit social enterprise, again, is a fourth sector in addition to nonprofits, government welfare services, and standard for-profit businesses, which is organized to meet, again, critical human needs. First of all, through innovation. Innovation is key. And so the innovation consists of either having access to resources that the other sectors lack, or being able to combine those sectors in different ways, and also being able to utilize those resources to achieve greater impact. And again, the only reason to organize as a for-profit social enterprise, if you have a social mission, again, is access to equity capital. But once you have access to equity capital, this does add to the resources that are available for social benefit, and also benefits innovation if that equity capital can be used in very innovative ways. But there are perils. And the main peril is, how do you be competitive in a market economy against the other three sectors? And how do you obtain equity capital from investors without ceding control, which could threaten the mission of the organization? And the answer is to gain trust. So how do we gain that trust to assure stakeholder cooperation? Well, we need to be able to brand the organization and say, again, we are different. We are a benefit corporation. Whether we are legally incorporated as such or whether we have a nonprofit You have to be able to present yourself to the public as saying, we are different and you can trust us in order to ensure the necessary cooperation. So that's the end. There's a question here, but I think questions are going to be left.
I'm just curious
So,
about, give us an example of the fourth sector of which corporations fit into that category.
Well, we will get one, namely the Beaver Corporation. To answer it quickly, in class I used the example of Better World Books, which is actually organized at Notre Dame as the result of a social enterprise competition. So it's a traditional book buyer, particularly of used textbooks, which is a crowded business. There are for-profit enterprises, for-profit businesses in that area. Yeah, what they say to students is, look, you can sell your textbook back to the college bookstore and receive a certain amount. You can sell it to us, or you can give it to us and not get that money, but we're going to support these literacy services. So it says they appeal to students to say, do some good in the world. Give your book to us rather than sell it back to the bookstore, and we're going to support literacy programs around the country. So maybe in the Q&A, I can talk about other examples.
Well, thank you, John. That was great. Really good background for everything that I'm about to talk about. So that was a perfect segue. So I'm Rebecca, and I'm with Badger. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Badger, we make a whole variety of different organic, natural personal care products. What we like to call balms, salves, magic potions, sunscreens, different things like that. And the company itself was started back in 1995. It's actually a family-owned and operated company. My father started the company then, and I now work there with my sister, my mother, and my father, and my husband actually as well. So very much family-run. And the products that we started with, my father was a serial entrepreneur, and so he would have a different business, well, multiple different business ideas every day, and multiple different businesses that he actually ran every year or so. And this was just one of those businesses. And at the time, he didn't have a vision of creating a social enterprise or creating a mission-driven business. He had a vision for a business, and then we had values as a family. And those values were how we organize the business. And so I think this is something that you'll see often with businesses that are mission-driven, that are really authentically mission-driven, is that the way that we run the business comes from the values of the leaders of the company, and those are then infused throughout everything that we do at business. This right here is a picture of two of our employees with their babies, and just an example of one of the things that we do at Badger is called our Babies at Work program. And this is something that actually we started about 10 years ago, and it came from an employee coming up to us and saying, I'm about to give birth and I'd like to bring my baby to work. Can I do that? And at the time, we'd never heard of that or thought about that, but we thought about it and we said, you know what? Sure, we think that would be something we can do, but before you do that, we need to do some research and make sure that we have a whole program around that, and that we can make sure that not just you are able to bring your baby to work, but everybody after you who wants to will be able to, and that we'll have a program around that. And that's really how we ran our business for many years. Just people would come up to us and they'd say, I'd like to have this at the company. And then we'd try and figure out how we could create a program around that. And what it came down to is that our being a mission-driven business was just wanting to be kind and generous to our employees, and thinking about our customers as a larger community, thinking about our local community, thinking about our suppliers as an extension of that. And with every different relationship, having a lens of kindness and generosity. And it wasn't until much, much later that we actually created a mission and principles, and that we established ourselves as an official mission-driven business. And it wasn't until even more recently that we actually put structure to that and became, that fourth sector of the economy, business that John was speaking about. This is actually a picture right here of our company, of the building and the gardens in front of it. We have organic gardens, and we do a farm-to-table lunch program during the summer for our employees, but we have organic lunches every day. We have 2 full-time cooks at Badger, and we do organic lunches every day. And I'm not going to go over all the different things that we do at the company. Those are just a couple of the different examples. But I think that this is a really important part of what creates this socially responsible business, is this business that is out there to do good in the world. But we also want to be successful, because for us, money is the fuel that allows us to be a successful business, but it's not the goal. And that's actually something that we have written into our mission. And as owners, we actually don't do profit sharing with just the owners or owners' draws. We do profit sharing with all the employees based on hours worked. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about B Corp and Benefit Corp. John touched on this. This is actually something that I think is really important right now, and a significant movement for socially responsible businesses, mission-driven businesses. And this is a movement that is really taking that fourth sector of the economy and giving businesses tools to be able to actively be part of it. So that it's not just saying I'm a mission-driven business, but that we actually have a structure to follow so that we're all working together on the same path. And B-Lab, who started B Corp, they were founded by 3 men who, 2 of them actually ran a company called N1. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the N1 basketball sneaker. In its time, when they were running the company, it was a $200 million basketball sneaker company, quite large, and they did a lot of socially responsible things. They had a really fun work environment. I think they actually even had a Babies at Work program. Have to confirm that. But they had a basketball court that people could play basketball on their breaks, and a lot of different fun things. But they had taken on a lot of investments, and at a certain time, they were forced to sell. Because they weren't making the profits they needed to, and so they were forced to sell. And what they watched was, after they sold, all the things that they had built in the company that they felt really made the company what it was were dismantled in order for it to become a more profitable company. And when they left there, they realized they didn't want to start another business. They wanted to create a structure that would prevent other businesses from having to ever face that challenge that they faced as a business, to protect them from having to be sold because they were trying to do things that they thought were good for their community. And so we have a little bit of this evolution of capitalism, where we go from this 20th century idea of the shareholder corporation. And this is business that has a sole purpose of fiduciary duty to maximize profits and return earnings to shareholders. And now in the 21st century, we see a stakeholder corporation. So this is taking a little bit of a shift and saying, no, the business is not going to survive just maximizing profits and returning earnings to shareholders. That's actually not a sustainable model for a business. We need a business that's also going to be looking at all of the stakeholders, that the shareholders can't be the only ones that have a value that's coming from the business. We have to look at our environment, we have to look at our employees, we have to look at the community, and that if we're looking at businesses that are going to be here for the long haul, then it has to be a stakeholder-based corporation. And so what they did with B-Lab is they actually talk about this fourth sector of the economy, and they said, we want to be giving businesses a structure so they can use business as a force for good. And this is not a new concept, but this is a structure that allows businesses to be on the same page, to speak the same language, and to be moving together in a way that is far more cohesive than what we had in the past, with just sustainable businesses that weren't all collectively working towards the same goal. And so just to give you an idea of where we are right now, we have just over 2,000 certified B Corps across 130 different industries in 50 countries, and with this one goal of creating a new sector of the economy. And what's actually, I think, more impressive than this is 2,064 B Corps that have become certified, have met this rigorous set of standards. But over 30,000 businesses have taken the impact assessment required to become a certified B Corp and have not yet become a B Corp. So that means, 30,000+ businesses are using that impact assessment as a tool to measure their impact and to decide whether or not they're a socially responsible business. And there are really large businesses doing this. Danone recently announced that they want their entire collection of subsidiaries to become B Corps, and they started with a B Corp for one of their businesses in France, and then also Stonyfield, which just became a B Corp. And we have B Corps that are already subsidiaries, such as Ben & Jerry's or New Chapter Supplements. We have Etsy that went public as a benefit corporation to be able to protect their values as a mission-driven business. And so we're really seeing a lot of different businesses that are using it. It's not just the small, little, mission-driven businesses. It's across the industry. So the way that they do this, when they were thinking about how do we create this new sector of the economy, is they said, we need more than just a mission-driven business. This is actually a whole network to create this new sector of the economy. We need funding, we need businesses, and we need legal support as well. And we need research, we need data. And so B-Lab is a nonprofit that organizes this. So they created the impact assessment, which allows us this whole 200-question assessment that's actually very rigorous. They have a separate committee that works on it. It's changed and honestly made more rigorous every 2 years. And so if you become a certified B Corp, you can't just reach a level and then stop. Your score will go down unless you continuously improve. It's an aspirational impact assessment. And then they also worked on passing legislation. This goes back to what John was saying, that if the fiduciary business duty is just to maximize profits and return earnings to shareholders, then you have to protect someone who's running the business to doing something that's good in the world, that they have to be able to have more flexibility. They want to be profitable, but also look at what the environmental and social impact is of the business. And then we have the GEARS rating system, which is used for social impact investors. And so they use this system to determine whether or not a business is a social enterprise, and then they can funnel money toward these businesses. And they also are able to use the data collected from those 30,000 businesses taking the impact assessment to do research on what does the social enterprise look like. And there's actually quite a few people doing research based off that data right now. So just a little bit more about the Certified B Corp before I go into the Benefit Corp. Certified B Corp, I would say that over the last 20 years we had a lot of individual certifications. So we had Certified Organic for products, Certified Fair Trade for products, green building certifications, LEEDs, etc. And so what the B Corp certification did was to take all of these different smaller certifications that were focused on individual products and combine it into one and say, what does the whole company look like? And how do we look at that whole picture to be able to say, is it largely focused on creating social benefit, or is it not? And so they created this very broad-based standard. And as I said, there's 200 questions in it, but you only actually have to meet 80 points to become a B Corp, which sounds low because we all think about you want to get 100% to actually get certified with something. But they do that because they recognize that there's a diversity of different ways that businesses can have social and environmental benefit. And again, because it's aspirational. And so they wanted to be able to give businesses the flexibility to determine their benefit. For us, for example, we'll never get points for having public transportation. We live out in the middle of nowhere. And there are a lot of other things that businesses might just choose to never work towards. On the other hand, every single year, we can look at our gap analysis and say, here are 10 different things that we can work towards. And every year, we've worked on improving our score and had a roadmap to figure out ways that we can become a better, more socially responsible, environmentally responsible business. So who are the B Corps? There are a lot of them. This is more of kind of your familiar ones. These are the ones you'd expect to become B Corps. But beyond that, there are also lots and lots of B Corps that are B2B, that are kind of out of the limelight, that are building this structure, this new sector of the economy. So in order to become certified, I mentioned that you had to take the impact assessment. There's two other things that you also have to do. One is that you have to sign a declaration of interdependence. And I think this is actually a really exciting part of becoming a B Corp. Because in our shareholder business world, everything is about competition. And in the B Corp world, what we've said is that if we're going to be successful at creating a new sector of the economy, and if our purpose for creating this new sector of the economy is to have mission-driven businesses, we need to do it together, and we need to work together, and we need to work together as a whole collective organism toward creating something that's more sustainable and lasting in the business community. And so you sign this declaration of interdependence, and you commit to working with other B Corps toward finding new ways to do businesses that's more socially responsible, and with the idea of being successful. This is not a nonprofit sector of the economy. This is for-profit. And we are independent in the sense that we don't need grants or loans. We're trying to figure out a way that we can use the market economy as it is, but also be doing good in the world. So that's a really great part of becoming a B Corp, and we have regular B Corp conferences where we're able to learn from our peers in the industry and find new best practices. The other thing that we have to do is, if there is an option to become a benefit corp, or to at least change our articles of incorporation, then we have to do that. So in the state of New Hampshire, up until a couple of years ago, that wasn't an option. If you were a C Corp, you couldn't actually change your fiduciary duty. Your purpose for being a business in the state of New Hampshire was to maximize profits and return earnings to shareholders. And so having benefit corp legislation passed here was really significant, because it allowed us to make a choice as a business to say, you know what, our purpose is more than that. Yes, we want to have profit, but we also want to do good in the world and to be a positive force as a business. And so what they're doing with this kind of collection of different things in terms of becoming a B Corp is you are really writing your social mission into the DNA of the business so that it's enduring, that it's not just a certification that you drop the next year, that it's something that will pass on if your business is sold, if it passes from generation to generation, you know, whatever might happen. We're trying to cauterize this idea of doing something good in the world in the fabric of the business, which also leads to having a far greater level of trust with your customers, because they recognize that you're not just greenwashing, that you have a solid sense of doing something good in the world that equals what a nonprofit might. Just in terms of the different parts of the impact assessment, there are different categories that look at environment, workers, customers, community, and governance. And again, very broad range of different questions, and that allows us as a business to have a roadmap. Badger became a B Corp in 2011, and the reason that we looked to become a B Corp, at the time we thought we were a great mission-driven business and we were doing everything right. But we thought, well, we're growing really rapidly, and what happens when we reach 50 employees? What happens when we reach 100 employees? We're at 100 employees right now. How do we maintain this mission? And so we thought that this would be a great way to maintain what we already had, and what we learned very rapidly is that we had so much room for improvement, that we were just at the very start of becoming what we wanted to be as a mission-driven business. And so this gave us this aspirational opportunity to grow and improve in everything that we do as a business. And so we started with a score of 85. This score of 138 was our last one, and this year, when we recertified, we're up around 150. So it's really very exciting. We're in the top 10% of all B Corps. But it's not just a score, it's that it gives us something to work towards. It gives us, like I mentioned, the gap analysis, a set of things that are very concrete that we can do to become a more socially responsible business. And then in terms of benefit corp legislations, this is something that only started a few years ago and is rapidly getting passed in every state around the country. And what's exciting about this is it's not just one organization getting these laws passed. It's not B-Lab, they're supporting it, but it's B Corps that we're the ones who are talking to our senators and representatives. In the state of New Hampshire, Badger reached out to our senators and said, this is something that we want because we want to become a benefit corp, and we think it's needed in our state, and we got it passed within 1 year. And so you can see that this structure is being widely accepted and that people are realizing that this fourth sector of the economy is not only important, it's imminent, it's coming, and it's something that more and more businesses are recognizing and valuing, and customers are recognizing and valuing as well. So that's all I have for this presentation, but we do have questions after this, and I'm more than happy to get into any of the details of our company and B Corp and Benefit Corp. Question and answer, right? I forgot to say that. Does anyone have questions?
I'll start. Thank you very much. For both of you, how much of the economy could go in this direction? I mean, could every company go in this direction, or is most of our economy reliant on for-profit, non-social enterprises?
I'll make a stab at that. Also give me an opportunity to congratulate Rebecca for a fine presentation, but also to disagree with at least a couple of points that she made. First of all, I don't see the traditional C corporation as being 20th century and the B corporation as being 21st century, as if this is a model toward which all corporations ought to evolve. But rather, I think of it as an option, a possibility that can be explored. And indeed, if we're going to have 4 sectors, why go back to 3 sectors? That is, we don't want to eliminate the standard for-profit corporation, but rather open up a field of possibilities to both standard shareholder corporations and more stakeholder-oriented benefit corporations. And secondly, some of what particularly the B-Lab is trying to foster in American business is what I would consider just to be sort of traditional corporate social responsibility, taking care of employees and the community and the like. So we need to make a distinction, I think, between what I would call sort of hardcore social enterprise, which is really in the market where there are market failures, doing things that would otherwise be done by government and nonprofits, as opposed to simply being a responsible corporate citizen. So if we think of this as fostering CSR, corporate social responsibility, I think all corporations ought to be moved into that direction. But in terms of really being a social enterprise and dealing with needs that are not met by traditional business, first of all, we're limited by the market. Well, actually, the market is immense. That's why we need government and nonprofits as well. But I think we are limited, and I'm not going to put a figure on it, into the types of organizations which are viable to organize as for-profit social enterprise. And then also we need to then create opportunities again for traditional nonprofits
And let's support government welfare services. Let's not cut budgets and try to impose the burden on nonprofits and social enterprises.
I would agree with that in the sense that I think the B Corps, the certified B Corps, are really leaders in this type of different economy. But there are far, far more businesses that can maybe be like a B Corp, not actually become a certified B Corp. And I don't even think it's the intention of BLAB to have all businesses become certified B Corps. But that's why you see that there's around 2,000 that are certified and over 30,000 that have taken the impact assessment. And I think that an amazing aspiration would be that all businesses are considering their stakeholders, whether or not they become a truly benefit-oriented business. But at least they're measuring their impact, or they're looking at it just like they might measure their financials. That is one aspect of business that they're thinking about, and they're making an effort to do something that's positive.
I assume B Corps are pass-through entities for tax purposes, and I'm wondering if any of the states that have adopted B Corp legislation also do something on the tax side because your mission is quasi-social.
So most of the legislation does not have any kind of tax incentives associated with becoming a benefit corp. There are maybe, I think, 2 or 3 states that do, but for ease of passing legislation, they wanted to make it equal to a C Corp because they didn't want to have C Corps fight against getting legislation passed. So it was felt for most states that it would be a better process to just pass it through with the same tax structure as a C Corp. I think maybe Pennsylvania and a couple others have tax incentives though.
Can you speak to we've talked a lot about the kind of incorporation side, benefits to businesses. Can you talk about trends on the other side on consumer demand? So related to sort of the first gentleman's question, thinking about, we've already talked about problematic, maybe contrasting a 20th and 21st century approach, but I'm just wondering where consumers are in terms of their demand for doing business with B Corps versus, in the market when they have an option versus buying a product from a non-certified company. So whether there's any consumer recognition and where we're moving in that direction.
Well, a friend of mine, David Vogel, has a very nice book, The Market for Virtue. And in other words, is the consumer market sufficiently strong to drive corporations in the direction of just greater corporate social responsibility, or again becoming B Corps? And his answer is, well, there is a market for virtue. It's fairly strong, but not very strong, and probably not increasing. So actually, I see the momentum, especially for social enterprises, that's coming not from consumers, but rather from innovators, from people who are entrepreneurial and looking to organize a business. And so typically, social enterprises are organized by people who would, in the past, have just gone the nonprofit route, but now see a new opportunity. So really it's people, including a lot of our MBA students coming out, who want to do good in society, who I think are the main drivers.
Yeah, I think it also depends on who your core customer is. So for certain businesses, becoming a certified B Corp will make a huge difference. Also in some B2B, where if you become a certified B Corp and other like-minded businesses want to identify who to work with, that might make a big difference to them. It's still fairly new and young, so I think there's not as much awareness outside of core sectors where people are looking for that sort of thing. But I think that when people do hear about a certification, it makes a difference to them because they want to be able to have trust in a company, and I think that's what happens when you have more and more products out in the market, and especially in my industry with cosmetics, where we have very little regulation, and so there's a lot of concern about safety. Trust is more important, and so our customers in particular look for things like certification. So I think it depends on the industry, though.
Also, when I teach this in class, I point out that some of the more prominent social enterprises are actually in very crowded markets. So think of cosmetics. Ben & Jerry's is, of course, in the ice cream business. Tom's of Maine sells toothpaste, of all things. Warbley Parker sells eyeglasses and the like. So many of these social enterprises are actually in very crowded consumer markets of essentially commodities. So the question becomes, how do you distinguish yourself? And so to some extent, not entirely, I think the social enterprises is what I call niche marketing, trying to appeal to that marginal consumer who does have some social concern, and also to the investment market. There are a large number of socially responsible investment funds who are looking around where are the companies we can invest in. So if we think of this as niche marketing to consumers and also to investors, then I think we also get another view of social enterprise.
I have a question related to the IRS. I have a question related to the IRS. How exactly is a B Corp taxed?
A benefit corp is taxed exactly like a C corp.
Are you're a B Corp, is that correct?
So we're a B Corp and a benefit corp. A B Corp is a certification which has no bearing on your taxes whatsoever.
Okay.
A benefit corp is a legal structure. And when you become a benefit corp, you're taxed like a C corp.
Oh, you're taxed like a C Corp?
Yeah.
So you have substantial tax implications.
I mean, yeah, but you can become a certified B Corp and be an LLC. Because with an LLC, you just write your corporators agreement and writing your mission in that.
And a follow-up question is, who provides the certification?
B-Lab. B-Lab is a nonprofit, and so they have an independent group that actually writes the certification. B-Lab certifies the certification.
Okay. So that if people were interested, the issue is you have to decide what kind of legal, what kind of tax situation you want, and choose the legal, the right legal structure for yourself, and then I guess consider.
Well, I mean, if you're already in business, you already have a legal structure, and then if you want to become a certified B Corp, you take the impact assessment. If you pass above 80 on the impact assessment, then you look at what your options are. So if you're in a state where you could shift from a C Corp to a benefit corp, you would do that. There's no tax implications, and it's generally a very easy, simple switch because all you're doing is rewriting a small section in terms of your fiduciary duty. If you're an LLC, you wouldn't change from an LLC to a benefit corp. You'd stay an LLC, but amend your corporators agreement.
I just have one last follow-up question, and that is, do you think in your sector that you see a larger amount of your profits going into charity? I mean, do you have a higher write-off?
Yeah, I guess I would say that there's probably a lot of businesses that are donating a certain percentage of profits to charities, but they do a lot of other things in terms of being a socially responsible business isn't just about how much you donate, it's also about your general day-to-day business practices.
Well, I would say that there are no tax benefits to being either legally a benefit corporation or having the B Corp certification, with two exceptions. One is the law for LLC3s is written in such a way as to exactly mirror the IRS code with regard to what are called program-related investments, PRIs. So foundations are required by law to give 5% of their assets to good causes, to good causes. And this cannot be investments in for-profit businesses, with one exception, namely what are called program-related investments, where the for-profit business does have a social benefit. So the reason why the L3Cs are written to mirror the IRS code is to enable LC3s to, in fact, get PRIs from foundations. My understanding is that so far the IRS has not ruled on whether indeed those qualify. But again, it's a kind of innovative financing which we need to do in social enterprise. And the other, well, it's escaping my mind at the moment, so That's the main tax advantage.
Good morning. I'm Lorette Edelman from the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, and I'm really interested in both aspects of this. But can you talk a little bit about the level of transparency that you either institute or that's required in being a B Corp? For example, in nonprofits or a charity, you've got to, you're very transparent with your bylaws and tax returns and those types of things. So what is that requirement with B Corps?
So for a B Corp, your results of your certification are made public on the B Corp website. And so anyone can go and look and see what your score is. When you become a benefit corp, you have to submit publicly a benefit report every year, and that follows loosely the same standard as a nonprofit, with one exception: you don't have to disclose your financials. A lot of benefit corps do, but that's not required.
You noted the benefit, one of the great benefits with, instead of being a nonprofit, being a for-profit, is the ability to raise equity. However, also it was noted that the returns on that equity may be hindered by the social benefits that the corporation offers. So if you could speak a little bit to how to balance the ability to raise equity from a for-profit, also with having to pitch an investor and saying, we could make you more money, but we're actually not going to make you as much money as we could because we're doing certain things better for our employees, customers, suppliers, etc.
Well, even though the main benefit of being a for-profit social enterprise is access to equity capital, typically equity capital in this world is not what we ordinarily think of as equity capital. There's not going to be a stock market for such for-profit social enterprises. In the examples I'm familiar with, it's providing capital with an expectation of some return, but not necessarily a market rate return. And very often the return is specified. So it really functions more like bonds than true equity capital. And it also gives rise to very innovative financial instruments. One is called the social impact bond, which I won't go into in detail, but for example, if you're providing a service that's otherwise provided by government, for example, it benefits government if we can reduce return to prison, recidivism. So if there's a nonprofit that says that we can reduce recidivism, government says, well, we'll pay for that, but we want you to produce first. So the social impact bond essentially goes to an investor. The first social impact bond in the US, the investor in fact was Goldman Sachs. They provided the resources and to an intermediary, and if the nonprofit could actually reduce recidivism, then the government would pay the intermediary who would provide a return to Goldman Sachs. But again, the return was specified. So there are all kinds of creative financial instruments. But it's not really true equity as we think of it, where there's sort of an unlimited return. You get everything. You get all of the profits of the enterprise. Typically, the return is specified, and it's going to be below market rate return for what you would find in the equity market.
I would also say that I mentioned the GEARS rating system, the Global Impact Investment Rating System, which B-Lab puts out, and that's used by organizations that specifically want to invest in social businesses, socially responsible businesses, and they won't invest in mainstream businesses. So there's a lot of money that is specified for this type of business, and they'll use something like that impact rating system to determine. Or, you know, as an investor, like I personally can get a portfolio of social impact investments for my 401k. Or, you know, there's a lot of different people that's what they're looking for, and that's just the only option that they're willing to invest in.
But let me just emphasize that there's a tremendous world of impact investing that is developing and available to for-profit social enterprises.
So I think we have time for one more question over here.
Hi, I want to follow up with that question by just mentioning the factor of like scope of time and how that might play at this competitive below, you know, whether it's below market returns or not, and what your thoughts are on, you know, taking a step back and seeing if there's profit that is more competitive over a longer course of time than, you know, like a snapshot of the market right now.
Well, one of the benefits of equity capital that I had on the slide but didn't read is equity capital actually lengthens the time horizon because there can be patient capital. So there's a number of drawbacks to the nonprofit form. One is that typically they have limited reserves. So they really have to meet their expenses every quarter. And whereas one benefit of equity capital, which, for example, banks are now being encouraged to have more equity capital. The reason is you can survive a drought period of negative returns. So I would say that possession of equity capital gives more stability, and especially if you have patient capital, you can build for the long term. So nonprofits are sort of captive to their donors, and it's difficult for them to use their resources in other ways. A few years ago, the Red Cross ran into difficulty because they got all kinds of contributions for Hurricane Katrina, and they used it to sort of build their infrastructure system, their computer systems and the like, which probably better served the mission of the Red Cross, but their investors didn't understand. And they were upset that what they donated for Hurricane Katrina was not actually contributed in aid. So there's a number of ways in which nonprofits are limited by their dependence upon philanthropy. So that equity capital provides resources to enable them to engage in long-term planning and to change their mission, which are not available to nonprofits.
I think I would add to that mission-driven businesses oftentimes are looking at the long haul. You know, for our business, we're looking at a business that can be passed from generation to generation. We want it to stay in our family. We're not looking at what our exit strategy is. And so how we choose to do business is focused on long-term sustainability, which also means that we're really stable as a business. So as an investment, we might not offer as much returns, and we don't take investments, and we have none, and we have no interest in any. But were we to, we might not have really great short-term returns, but it would be a damn stable business to have your money in for the long term. And I think that's what you'll find with a lot of socially responsible businesses, is that they're stable and they're not taking risks that are crazy risks, because they're looking at how do we maintain a business that will be successful in our community and for our environment and for our employees over a really long period of time.